This is Duke University.
And so this is a rare and wonderful occasion to have someone, not only just in terms of talking about Dr. Fuller's accomplishments, distinguished professor of education at Mark Anthony University, the organizations that he's been involved with, his involvement with the North Carolina Fund, going back to its inception in the 1960s, the radical impact that the North Carolina Fund had in terms of reshaping public policy in this country, particularly around poverty. For those of you who don't know, the North Carolina Fund was kind of the rubric that created things like Head Start and a range of other programs that were created in 1960 to address poverty as almost kind of a backdoor way to address racial inequality in this country. To his work as the founder of the Malcolm X Liberation University here in Durham, and then later in Greensboro, until this current moment where, as he mentions throughout his new memoir, No Struggle, No Progress, A Warrior's Life from Black Power to Educational Reform, where he very often is the black face in the room of the school choice movement in 2014. So I'm honored and happy to sit down to have this conversation, and we will talk for a while, and then hopefully some of you will join in. And so I'll start, Dr. Fuller, with, you mentioned early in the book that there have been so many kind of stories about who you are and what you believe, and the memoir was an opportunity for you to set your record straight. So talk about the process of thinking about, at this moment, producing this memoir.
Yeah, well, first of all, I really want to thank you and thank Lou for having me, and thank all of you all for being here. It's kind of weird, I should say weird, but it is kind of weird to come back on the campus and kind of recall some of the stuff that was going on. But there are about 14 books out there where people talk about me in like one way or another, right, depending upon their particular point of view. And so a number of my friends for a long time have been pushing me to say, hey man, you should write your own book and, tell your own story in your own way, which is what I really attempted to do in this memoir. And there are really sort of four reasons why I wrote it. That's the first one. The second one is, I'm hoping that young people, some of the young people who are here will read the book. And the one lesson I hope you'll get out of the book is that if you decide to engage in struggle for any period of time, you're going to have to deal with contradictions. And the question is, how well can you deal with those contradictions? And do you understand them when you're dealing with them? So, for example, I started this book out with a meeting with George Bush, the younger Bush, because I figured some people would not go past that. They were, oh my God, that's it. And because for them, a meeting with George Bush would be a matter of principle. For me, it's an issue of strategy and tactics. And the whole issue of how do you deal with what Derek Bell called interest convergence theory, in your life. So if you read the book, or even if you don't, I mean, you'll find out that at one time I've been called a revolutionary, I've been called a counter-revolutionary, I've been called Uncle Tom, I've been called a lackey, I've been called a radical. And so one of the questions I have is, how does one person get to be all of that? What is it about me? And I think what it is that I just refuse to let people put me in any particular box. I'm not going to let people decide for me who I am, what I'm about, and why. And you all will learn that if you choose to do anything out here, there's always going to be somebody who is A, on the other side, B, has a certain view, and they're going to be haters. It's just the way it is. And so the question is, how well can you deal with that? The third thing is, and it's a little bit more painful, is a number of the people that I talk about in this book, particularly those who work with me and I work with in North Carolina, a number of them have died. And so one of the things I was trying to do in this book was by telling my story to sort of tell their story. And so there's a story, for example, of a woman named Thelma Miller in the book. We called her TJ. And TJ was actually the fiercest of all of us. And I was with TJ on her deathbed at Durham, and TJ is the kind of person that, I read to her what I was going to say about her. And even though she was on her deathbed, she was the kind of person that would cuss me out if she didn't like what I had to say. And the fact that she liked it was really very important to me. And then the final reason is it gave me a way to honor my mother and my grandmother. And I could tell stories, but one of the chapters is entitled Grandma's Hands. And it's really about my grandmother. And one of the stories I tell in there is that, and this is not old school, this is ancient school, what I'm going to tell you about now, is, like back in the 40s, I was in Shreveport, and my mother and I were sitting on the back steps of the house, and the cops came by and said, hey, there's a robber, some guy had robbed somebody, and they announced that the person was in our house. And my mother said, well, there's nobody in the house. And for some reason, the cop kicked her. And so the people who lived in the house behind us saw that. And they called my grandmother. She was at work. My grandmother came home and got her gun and went to the police station. So this is the kind of blood that's in my veins. So I'm able to, tell those kind of stories in the book. So, that's pretty much why I wrote it.
I find it interesting, particularly around the school choice piece. Very early in the book, you talk about going to Catholic school. And back in the 50s and the 60s, I went to a Seventh-day Adventist school. Very often, these Catholic schools, these parochial schools, were the ways that Black parents articulated school choice, right? They're, not to send their kids to public school systems. How much do you think your experience going to a Catholic school in Milwaukee impacted how you began to think about school choice much, much later in your life?
You know what? I'm not sure it did a lot, to be honest with you. I don't think that my personal experience in that sense had much to do with my position on parent choice. The struggles that we went through in Milwaukee to try to get low-income and working-class Black children educated had a much larger impact, really. And I try to tell people all the time, I had never read Milton Friedman's, Capitalism and Freedom. So I never even knew that that Milton Friedman had proposed vouchers. For me, I came to vouchers through a series of community struggles. And for me, it was never about free markets and all of that. It was always about social justice. And I just feel like you shouldn't have an America where only those of us with money have the ability to choose the best school for our kids. Because I believe that if you live in America and you got money and schools don't work for your kids, you're either going to move to communities where they do work, you're going to put your kids in private schools, or you're going to find the most expensive tutoring that you can find, or you're going to do all three. And so like in 1998, I debated this senator who I had never heard of, named Barack Obama. They called me over and said, hey, there's this young dude, he's really going to go places out there. So, and we had a debate, about vouchers, and they actually recorded it and made a pamphlet out of it. So I actually quoted in the book, right? And my thing is pretty simple, man. Like Barack and Michelle, and I support them and everything. But you can't put your kids in Sidwell Friends.
Right.
And then demand that other people's children stay in the DC public school system, whether they work for them or not. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I'm like Burgess King. I don't think the Obamas ought to be the only people who live in public housing who have parent choice. So and that's just the way it is. And I know everybody got issues and this and that, but the one thing I've learned about America, man, is you sit down talking with people, and an essential question to ask them is, where do you send your kids? Where do you send your kids? And so you got poor parents who are forced to stay in schools that don't work for their kids, so that the people who are teaching them can put their own kids in private schools. And then we say that that's okay. So hey, I don't care what names people call me, on this issue. To me, it's not okay.
Tom Brokaw a few years ago did a bunch of programming about America's Greatest Generation, talking about the folks who survived World War II. some of us would argue there's a greater generation in the 20th century. Those folks who came into consciousness and politicized around February 1, 1960, and everything that occurs after that. What was it like for you living through that particular period? And it's some of that energy that eventually brings you to North Carolina.
But, what's interesting is, there's some of my friends here, who went through some of this stuff with me, particularly when we tried to organize the hospital at Duke, tried to form the unit at Duke, which is a long story in itself. But, what, like when you're living this stuff, at least I speak for myself, I never really thought about it. You're just, you're in the moment and you're doing whatever it is you think is the right thing to do. And I never thought about how to think about what was happening, as you would do later, when you step back and you try to look at it and figure it out. But it was just clear to me when I came down here, like I came to Durham, it was either May 3rd or May 5th, 1965 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, not that I remember, but, and I really came to help fight the war on poverty. And I was naive enough to think that the objective of the war on poverty was to end poverty. That actually, that we were going to fight this war. And at the end of this war, there wasn't going to be any poverty. And so I came down here and, I knew nothing about Durham. I was assigned to work in Hayti. In McDougal Terrace in that area. I'd never seen, in the middle of the city, streets not paved. People literally still had outdoor toilets in some places, very close to Duke University. And so my job was to try to figure out how to organize people so that they could begin to impact their own lives. And when I looked at the language of the Economic Opportunity Act, it said you're supposed to have feasible involvement of the poor. And what I thought, maximum feasible involvement of the poor. And what I thought that meant was that the people were supposed to be a part of the structure, both from a governance standpoint, like be on the board. But the other thing I thought was that whenever these poverty programs and stuff get set up, everybody make money except poor people. And people often say, oh, no, you can't end poverty by throwing money at it. Well, actually, you can. I mean, that's actually the way to end poverty, is to give people some money. So my idea was that, if there don't be jobs and stuff, I want to make sure that some of the people who live in these communities get some of these jobs. So like I reshaped the budget so that there were aid positions and all of that. So you could actually hire people and they could actually benefit from the war on poverty. So,
There's a scene in the book where you're at a gas station. As you say in the book, you forgot to clean out your trunk.
Oh yeah, with the rifle.
You open the latch and the dude sees all these guns in the car. And your supervisor writes a letter where he argues like you had the most dangerous job in North Carolina, right? You needed to be able to protect yourselves.
True. No, well, I did a lot of stupid stuff, man. This writes right up there. Actually, I had bought these rifles. I forgot how many of them it was, and I put them in the trunk of my car. What actually happened was I had a flat, and so I took the car to the dealer to get my flat fixed. And forgot that I had all of these guns in the trunk of my car. And so when they opened up, so that was a little bit of a problem. True.
You talk very honestly throughout the book about some of the collateral damage of organizing, doing the work, and what kind of impact it would have on your home life.
Yeah.
Your marriages, not being able to spend time with your children. Reflecting back on that moment, would you do anything different?
Well, two things. I almost never answer the question, would I do anything differently, based on sitting back 50 years later. The reason for that is just because it's like, to me, Monday morning quarterbacking. You know what I'm saying? Everybody can play a perfect game after the game. But you have to play the game at the moment in which it occurs, right? And so you do whatever you think was the thing to do at that moment in time. I made tremendous numbers of mistakes in my personal life, and I cannot blame some of the dumb stuff that I did, and really stuff that hurt a lot of people. I can't blame that on my work. I have to blame that on decisions that I made. And it's like one of the most painful things in the book was I met my father when I was 30-some years old, right? Like, I'm giving a speech in California. This dude rolls up and says, "Hey, man, I'm your father." And I guess everybody deals with that differently. Some people would, "Oh my God, my dad." But I was like, so, I mean, I didn't, no, seriously, I never seen them, I never heard from them, so you gonna roll up, I'm 30-some years old, I mean, to me, you just deposited sperm, I mean, I don't, you know, I just, but the painful part of it was, I did the same thing, but my son Van came up to me, and the difference is, he had the strength and the courage to reach out to me, and then we established a relationship which stopped me from repeating the same mistake, or not the mistake, that was no mistake, the same thing that my father did to me, I was getting ready to do to someone who was my son, and only because of him did that not happen. I asked my youngest daughter, Miata, once, you know, what kind of grade you give me as a father? And she's mad because I put this in the book. But, and she gave me an 85. And, you know, you want 100, or, you know, you want 110. You're 100, Dad. She said, "Hey, man, you got 85. No, seriously, and because you have to know my youngest daughter, she's like, ruthlessly, you know, like, "Hey, this is where it is." And it was because you weren't there. I mean, because, you know, of the divorce. And even though I did everything that I could, like every summer, you know, as Walter, every summer I kept my kids. I came down, they were still in North Carolina, I was in Milwaukee. I came down here, you know, for all of the significant events. One time my son, Malcolm, stole something out of a store in Greensboro. His mother called me, "Hey, you know, Malcolm stole something." I literally got on the plane, came down there, gave this fool a whipping, and went back home. I mean, you know, as a way of saying, "Hey, man, like, I'm gonna be in Milwaukee, but I'm your dad, and you can't be stealing stuff." I mean, so, but, you know, if you've been married 3 times, clearly, you know, there are issues. You know, and you literally, you can't blame it on, like, my work and all that. That's, you know, it's just stuff you do you shouldn't have been doing. Like, so, you know, I felt like, and really Lisa Fraser Page pushed me on some of this stuff. I mean, I didn't want to be taught. I wasn't trying to do no tell-all book. You know what I'm saying? First of all, there's the statute of limitations for some of this stuff I did. It's not over, so there's no way I can put that in the book. But other stuff, you know, you can say. But at the same time, if you do write a memoir, you can't just talk about all the stuff that puts you in the best light.
You gotta talk about baby mama.
You gotta tell the truth, right? You really do. I mean, or else, you know, don't write it. So,
you here in North Carolina, you start to build a relationship with students at Duke, and they start to organize significantly. And I want to read these 5 points. You know, Duke established or had a celebration of the 50th anniversary of the integrating of Duke. If I'm being honest, it was tepid at best. If a signature point for so many of the students was the Allen Building takeover, no one wanted to talk about that. Yes, there was an exhibit, but no one really wanted to have a conversation. But you mentioned in the book, you know, the 5 points of what the students were demanding. A selective buying campaign, you know, so that they could leverage the university's economic power with institutions in Durham to get better service for students and better housing and what have you. The second point, you know, to have contracts with Black businesses in Durham. The third point being to hire a Black recruiter to help recruit Black students. Of course, now here at Duke, the associate director of admissions is in fact an African American man. Black faculty to mentor Black students, and then finally, you know, the creation of a Black Studies department, which, you know, years later came into fruition. when these things didn't go the way students wanted it to go, they had the gumption to take over buildings, right? And this was not, outside of the box. I mean, students at Cornell University did this with guns.
Yeah.
Black
I
students.
saw one of them in Greensboro the other night.
Black students at a historically black school like Morehouse
And Morgan.
took over the Board of Trustees meeting. Sam Jackson was one of those black students in Morehouse. They took over the Board of Trustees meeting, at Morehouse, right? So this stuff is happening, and you get brought in, right? You're giving a speech someplace else, and so what are you thinking when you're hearing this stuff about the students that have taken over, right, the Allen building?
Yeah, I mean, what had happened was when I went over to North Carolina Fund, I created this internship program where I went all around the state, and I hired mostly black students, but there's some white students, and trained them as community organizers, and then put them in 11 counties throughout North Carolina. And one of the dudes is a dude named Chuck Hopkins, who was the president of the Black Student Organization. And I think Chuck worked in Greensboro. But they came back after being out there that summer, and because there was the Black Student Movement, also because of their experiences, and said, hey, what we're learning at Duke has no connection to what we saw during the summer. So at some point, I wasn't involved in those discussions, but at some point they decided to take over the Allen building. And so when they took over the Allen building, it was in the morning. I actually had a speech at Bennett. It was on my way to speak at Spelman. And they called me and said, hey, the black students from Duke just took over the Allen building, and Chuck is the leader, and they want you, and blah, blah, blah. So I come back to campus, and they let me in through some back window, back door, or something of the Allen building. And this was earlier in the day. And then a lot of these, and there's some photographs, I think, of students sitting around maybe actually during the takeover, I'm not quite sure. And the discussion in the beginning was really militant, but as the day started rolling on and we started getting closer to night, a lot of students started talking about, hey man, my mother didn't bring me to Duke to get arrested. No, seriously, it was getting a lot less militant as the day was rolling on. So we had a zillion meetings in that building, it was democracy and all of that stuff. And then, so my job was to figure out how to get them out of here, in the most militant fashion. So we actually decided to go out, I think we went out the back or something, went out like this. And the problem was the police had amassed in a part of Duke force away from campus. And so when they came, they had made some decision at some time they were going to rush the building. So they broke out all the windows and stuff and tear gassed the building, got in there, and we weren't in there. And they were so angry that they came out and literally tear gassed all these white students who were just standing around doing nothing. Yeah, there's a picture of them. I mean, and so it turned them into militants because they were just standing around. And then that led to a march on the president's house, and all the demands, and then that led to Martin Kilson being brought on campus to talk about the African Studies program. But at that time, the union used to be unorganized, but it was across the quad, and they gave the black students a room on the top floor of that building, and creatively they call it the black room. But anyway, so so after the takeover of the Allen building and all of the aftermath, we had a meeting up there, and we made a decision we were going to create an independent educational institution, which became Malcolm X Liberation University. And in theory, the Duke students were going to all leave Duke and come to Malcolm X Liberation University. And that went along just about like in the Allen building as it got darker. So that photograph over there with it says Malcolm X School, I think, or something like that. What happened was the students were supposed to leave Duke en masse. And so they had this march, and you can see the chapel in the background that started, in the circle there. And, we had organized black people to march from St. Joseph's to 5 Points. They were supposed to, which they did, march from Duke to 5 Points. And then symbolically, we were going to take them into the black community. And then we all marched back to St. Joseph's for this huge rally. But obviously they didn't leave Duke. None of them left Duke. The closest one was Bertie Howard, who didn't leave, she just quit going to class. And so ultimately, we created Malcolm X Liberation University.
You talked at the beginning of our conversation about contradictions.
Yeah.
While this is all going on, your wife at the time is having another child.
Oh, yeah.
That's being born premature and has to go, and she's at Lincoln Hospital, right?
Correct.
So they're taking the child from Lincoln Hospital
Right.
to Duke.
Right.
And at the same time that you're demanding certain kind of responses from
True.
Duke, you actually need the skill set and resources from the university, right, in order to save your child.
Yeah, my son Malcolm was born prematurely. He had a thing called hyoid membrane, which had killed John Kennedy's baby. And there were only so many hospitals in the United States at that point in history that knew how to treat hyoid membrane. One of them was Duke. And so Malcolm was over at Lincoln Hospital, which was the black hospital, and the doctor spotted it and brought him to Duke. So I stayed with Malcolm literally around the clock and would leave to go protest and argue with the president and then come back with my son. So yeah, it was, because he was in Duke Hospital. Had he not come to Duke, he would have died. It was because there's only a couple places, as I said, in the country that knew how to deal with that. And luckily enough, Duke was one of those places.
You mentioned with the creation of Malcolm X Liberation University, right? And the official founding is actually October 25th, 1969, so 45 years next week. That part of the funding for that came from an offshoot of the North Carolina Fund.
Yeah, that's true.
And
That wasn't the worst one.
And you know, and that's the irony of the moment, right? When we think about the birth of Black studies in this country, right? It's money coming from the Ford Foundation. I know, your colleagues down at the Institute of the Black World in Atlanta, they're having these same, Vincent Harding and all those folks are having these same conversations, right? Abdullah Kalamat leaves, that institution because of these kind of debates.
There's some people in the room who know about that. Right.
Did you feel any contradictions about creating this kind of radical Black curriculum and having white money, in some ways being the foundation?
I'm glad you asked that question because it's a great question. It's an honest question, and I'll give you an honest answer. We also created a total controversy within the Episcopal Church because the first big grant that we got to create Malcolm X came from the General Convention of Special Programs of the Episcopal Church. And it almost caused people in the church down here to withdraw from the church because this came out of New York, But here's the contradiction. Like, one of my closest friends in the world was John Walton. John Walton is the son of Sam Walton, who founded Walmart. I was one of 4 people to speak at his funeral. There are people who, when you mention Walmart, they go into convulsions, and I get it, around the wages, healthcare, and I really ain't got no issues with that. That just ain't my problem. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and the way I look at this, it's very hard to help people who ain't got nothing by going to people who ain't got nothing to get something. You actually ultimately got to go to people who got something to get something for people who don't got nothing, as Chris Rock would say. Now, the issue is, can you deal with that? How do you get white money to create Malcolm X Liberation University? You ask. and if they give it to you, you use it. Yeah. And because I'm always clear about what purpose I'm using money for. And what's really interesting about this is that it ends up with a group of Black people or white people, whatever, arguing over whose white people's money is okay. Okay, so if you this white people, the money is okay. If you this white people, the money ain't okay. and I'm sitting there saying, like I had people one time who came to a meeting with me. They came because they were part of the Rockefeller Foundation. And they wanted to argue with me about me taking money from the Bradley Foundation. I'm saying, hey man, Y'all want to have a discussion about how Rockefeller got their money? How you gonna roll up in here talking to me about blah, 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 and your butts got here because the Rockefeller Foundation gave y'all money? If you so pure, you should accept no money from the Rockefeller Foundation. Because at a certain point, living in America for me has always been a contradiction. And Republicans, Democrats, I don't believe in none of them. Because at some point in time, every one of them has rubbed me on my head and called me boy. The question I said to you young people is, can you deal with the contradictions? And if you can't, it's okay. I mean, because if this brother hollers at me for taking money from the Walton Family Foundation, I'm gonna listen. But hell, I ain't gonna not take money. You know what I mean? That's his problem. He gotta work that out. That's not my problem. I'm serious. But I ain't mad at him. Because I understand why he's taking the position that he's taking. But I understand that I'm gonna go get the money. Because I got a school I'm trying to run. I got kids who come to us in the 9th grade who can't read. 6 of them came in, can't read. How do you get in the 9th grade and can't read? Okay, people are hollering about, oh, I hate charter schools, I hate this. Go up to Gaston. Just when I was coming in here today, there were some kids from Gaston, from college prep, touring Duke. Years ago, 10 years ago up in Gaston, none of those kids would have had the opportunity that they have right now. Without Kip, this would not be happening. So people can be mad, and I get why you're mad, but while you being mad, I'm gonna try to do something. And one of the things I've learned, I'll stop this, is that there's this great African-American philosopher named Junebug Jabbo Jones. And what Junebug Jabbo Jones said was, Mr. Say ain't nothing, Mr. Do is the man. And basically what he was saying was, you can say anything. The question is, what are you going to do? And if you don't like what I'm doing, tell me what you're doing, given the conditions that our people are living under. But here's the problem that I have now. I'm supporting parent choice. And I'm going to talk about interest convergence theory for a moment. I'm supporting parent choice. I'm standing up next to Bobby Jindal in Louisiana, right? I'm mad as hell because he's against Medicaid, he's for voter ID, he's for all of this stuff that I'm against. But he supports the Opportunity Scholarship Program in Charles. So we're suing him on Common Core. Okay. So I'm like, hey, I support you on parent choice, but I want to be clear. I oppose what you're doing on voter ID. I oppose the fact that you're talking about, not having Medicaid for people. So what interest convergence theory is, and Derek Bell talks about it in his book, Silent Covenants. He said, look, if you look at the civil rights movement, he said, like, black people made progress at that point in history, number one, because of our own movement. But secondly, because at that point in history, the United States was trying to convince people that democracy was a better form of government than communism, right? It's hard to do that when Bull Connor is sicking dogs on people, man. So at a certain point, the white rulers went to Bull Connor, hey, man, you can't keep sicking dogs on people. Now, some people did it because they didn't think you should sick dogs on people. But others, there was a larger political thing happening, right? So what happens is at that moment, your interests converge and certain changes are made. But what you have to be clear is that convergence is not permanent because you're not converging with the same worldview. So there are people who support opportunity scholarships and vouchers, but they don't support them for the same reason that I do. And then at some point, we're going to pull apart because fundamentally, we don't agree. We don't have the same worldview. We're not coming to this from the same perspective. And that's what I mean about living with contradictions.
What does that look like in terms of aggressive policing. You talk in the book about Ernest Lacey,
Right.
and what's happening in Milwaukee, right? And it's difficult not to read that and not think about Ferguson and everything that's taking place. What do you think has to be on the table for that kind of interest conversion to occur around aggressive policing?
Well, first of all, what has to be on the table is we have to fight. We have to fight back. I mean, what's ironic is I have a group of young people who work with me called the Fuller Torch Fellows. Everybody's younger than me, so. But they're like, some of 40s, 30s, 20s, quote, young professionals. And one of them, named Curtis Sales, is leading a crew that is fighting for justice for Dontre Hamilton, who was a young man who was shot 13 times by the Milwaukee police. I led the Coalition for Justice in 1981. Curtis is leading the Coalition for Justice for Dontre Hamilton in 2014. So what has to be in place, man, is resistance. What has to be in place is, Frantz Fanon wrote a book called Wretched of the Earth. In the book, he says, every generation out of relative obscurity must discover its mission and either fulfill it or betray it. That means every generation at some point in time has got to figure out, well, what is our mission at this moment in history? And what is it that we're going to do or not do based on what we see that mission to be? And so my job right now is to help Curtis, because what did y'all do? I mean, why did y'all have the mass meetings? How did you put forth your demands? My job is to explain to him what we did, not for you to follow it, but that's just a model. And then you got to figure out, given Twitter, given Facebook, Pinterest, given whatever, Instagram, you got to figure out how to use all of those tools in your story. I have none of that. We just have signs. And people still got signs. But there's all kinds of other tools that are available. But the key is tools isn't the driver, right? The driver is the motivation for justice. And that motivation for justice has to exist. Because if you look at the study of history, there has always been resistance to oppression. But what we've got to do as a Black community, though, I don't know how you see this, man, but as hard as we got to fight against what's happening to us with the police, we got to fight equally hard against what we're doing to ourselves.
Real talk.
You can't, one of the tragedies, man, when I looked at Ferguson, was I'm saying to myself, there's some dudes that are in this demonstration that when they leave this demonstration, they would shoot another Black man as quickly as this police officer just did. How cold is that? And what are we going to do about that? And we have to fight both of those things simultaneously, right? Not to take away the rage from what happened to Michael Brown, but man, where's the rage for the fact that in that same month, three-year-old girls in Maryland were killed by gunfire that was because of Black men. Like one of the dudes took his daughter, man, in a car, and he goes and shoots and kills two family members. The little girl ends up getting killed in a shootout with him and the police because the police don't know he got his 3-year-old daughter in the backseat of the car. At some point, when are we going to own that? See, and so for me, I got to talk about both things because both things, enrage me. But that's not to take away from the police brutality part of it, right? But on Memorial Day, I'm at a rally for a 10-year-old girl who got shot in the head. She ultimately died. She got shot in the head because these two fools had a gunfight on a playground. And you know what's really bothersome about it? They didn't have no remorse, man. It's like what has happened in our community is there are no boundaries anymore, man. And at some point, as a collective, as a people, we got to talk about that. We can't just parachute in there, Sharpton and Jesse and all of them, parachuting in, giving speeches, getting back on the plane, because the people who live in those communities, they got to deal with this stuff day after day after day after day.
How do you feel about, since Ferguson, the regular import of folks to organize, spend a weekend or spend a week and then head back? Do you find that to be a healthy mode of organizing? Or are you of the mindset that, these same folks could be organizing their actual communities as opposed to coming to Ferguson?
I think both things are important, right? It's just like when people talk about the ed reform movement as like a new civil rights movement. It curls me up, man. And I get it and all of that, but this ain't the same, man. This is the most. What can I call it? We like flying in planes, man. I'm staying in a cool hotel. I'm not laying on no floor in Mississippi. Ain't nobody gonna shoot me for trying to form a school. So even though this is important, when you start making these comparisons, you make real comparisons, man. So if you read Payne's book, I Got the Lighter for You,
Yeah.
and in chapter 8, he talks about the difference between organizing and mobilizing, right? And Ella Baker defined the difference between organizing is slow, respectful work, where you build relationships over time. Mobilizing is you get people for picture taking. And mobilizing is important, right? And sometimes you can mobilize in order to organize, but most of the time you organize in order to mobilize. And so the reality of it is that if people come in, like Jesse and all of them, that's okay, as long as there is an organized base that's going to be there after they leave. See, because organizing is much more than holding press conferences. It's the day-to-day work. Really getting to know people, right? Understanding people. That's what we did. When we tried to organize this hospital, one of the people nobody probably ever talks about it, dude, is Oliver Harvey. Oliver Harvey, Mr. Harvey, this black man, Mr. Harvey was no taller than this one. I'm telling you, no, I'm serious, man. Huh? Maybe a little. Maybe about that. I'm sorry. Okay.
Not much though.
Yeah, but can you think about a janitor at Duke in the 1940s, man, standing up saying we need to have a union at Duke University, the plantation? No, I'm serious. I mean, it's y'all school and everything, but y'all gotta know what this place was like, man. Before the vigil. The white students who laid out there in the quad after King's assassination. But the work that Mr. Harvey, Miss Harvey, that Mabel and all of them did, trying to organize in the hospital. The people who serve the meals. I'm talking about the people who clean up all y'all's rooms and stuff. The way they were treated. And so if anybody will celebrate anything, gotta be celebrating Mr. Harvey. And those people who had the courage to try to build a better life. So, and to me, that's the reason to study history. The reason to study history isn't just to, it is the past tense and stuff, especially if it's history, but it's to understand what impact does that have on what it is that is or is not happening today.
You come to North Carolina, as you just said, to fight poverty. There's no way to think about fighting poverty in the 1960s or before then without thinking about a relationship with the labor movement and labor organizing.
Right.
Do you lament that in 2014, whenever we talk about political engagement, somehow folks aren't talking about what McDonald's fast food workers are trying to do in terms of wages? There's a disconnect between the idea of a labor movement and everything else that's happening in terms of organizing in this country.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, particularly given my contradictions. Because I got to endure and struggle with the teachers union. But a friend of mine and we did a paper where we tried to make the point that the teachers unions are not working class organizations. And I'll send you a paper if you want. That's a separate issue. We did it at AERA. But here's the thing. Like every labor movement that I've been aware of had to deal with how to organize at the moment in history that they were in. And so the issue today is, what shape should the labor movement take for workers in fast foods places and et cetera? What does that look like? And it's almost like, to me, like what had to happen when the AFL-CIO was first created, before the CIO part was in there, right? And the struggle of Black people to become a part of that whole union movement. And so I just think that this generation is going to have to define the character of the labor movement, because unions become bosses in a certain sense. I mean, as huge organizations get formed, which is the institutionalization of them, but as you get institutionalized, you lose the fervor that brought you together in the first place. And which is one of the reasons why I think you have to stay committed to purpose and not to the method to get to purpose. Because when you begin to get committed to the method, you then are on the road to become a protector of the status quo. And so it's like fighting a revolution is one thing, governing after you win is another thing. And how do you maintain the push that made you fight the revolution in the first place?
That kind of piece where nonviolence, folks seem to forget that nonviolence was a strategic decision.
I think so.
Right, but it gets wrapped into this other thing that in many ways maintains, as you just said, the status quo. We're going to open this up to questions now.
Don't hesitate. Yes.
The photo on the cover of your book is awesome. And I think I remember seeing somewhere that was taken in Durham on Main Street. And could you tell us a little about the history of Durham in that time and the work that you did in Haiti, and around that time?
Yeah, well, let me tell you the story of this picture. Like one of the things I did this time down there, since I've been here a week, is I actually went back and retraced the steps, and I know exactly where this picture was taken. I know exactly when it was snapped. Billy Barnes snapped that picture of me the day after Martin Luther King was killed. And what occurred was that Adam Clayton Powell had been invited to come to Durham to give a speech, actually at Duke. Adam Clayton Powell was a congressman who actually was kicked out of Congress, and he went to Bimini with Miss Ohio, which, I'm just saying, that is what he did. But I ain't got nothing to do with that. But anyway, so he was invited to come to Duke to speak, but he was an alcoholic. And I was staying on Lawson Street, and Adam Clayton Powell was staying 4 doors down from me on Lawson Street. His aide came over to speak, and since we didn't have Twitter and all that then, it took a while for people to find out that Martin Luther King was assassinated. And so we actually found out late that afternoon, almost into the evening. And so when we heard, I rushed back home because I was, like I said, standing right across the street from NCC, from Old Senior Dormitory is what it was. And the students at North Carolina Central had gathered at A.B. Duke Auditorium, and they were getting ready to go downtown. And I stood up and said, we're not going downtown. This was because I knew that people were going to get killed that night for no reason. And some of the students called me handkerchief head, Tom, blah, blah, blah. I said, call whatever you want, we're not going downtown. And they actually listened to me. And I said, what we're going to do is we're going to have a demonstration that will be respectful in the way that Martin Luther King would want. That was the next day. So we had marched from NCC, almost single file, for blocks and blocks and blocks, had a demonstration at City Hall, and then we were on the way back going back towards NCC. So this picture right here, this is like the south side of Main Street, and there's a building. Self-help is there now, and there's a pharmacy there. I was standing fairly close to that where the pharmacy is now, and the reason why I know that it is because I went back, and this part of the structure is still the same. And what happened was that when Billy Barnes snapped this picture, I had just spotted 3 white dudes with high-powered rifles on what was then the CCB bank building. And so I'm looking up, and I remember exactly when Billy Barnes snapped this picture, because I just spotted these dudes with these high-powered rifles. And what you can't see is over on the other side of the street is the Klan. And so, and if you can just imagine the tension that existed. This is the day after Martin Luther King is killed. We march in. You got a Klan on one side of the street. You got 3 dudes with high-powered rifles up on the roof. And I'm trying to like figure out who are these people and what is getting ready to happen here. So that's sort of the history of that picture.
Is this a clip of a larger picture that includes this other background?
You can't, you know what, you can't see the other side of the street, but in the book, there's a more of a panoramic shot, like this shot right here. And what you can see is you can see more of the people. And because when you actually look at this, you can see that people are still down at 5 points, because this is really at 5 points. And they're still crossing the street, coming back, because I'm near the front. And there's a mural that is being done right now, right there by the Arts Council.
Yep.
And that mural, there's a in the middle of the mural, there's this dude in purple, like this. That's me, and that picture was taken further up the street from where this was taken on the same day. So that's what this picture is. And when I decided to do the book, this was the picture that I wanted to be on the cover of the book. In terms of the organizing stuff, it was essentially we did organizing work to get streets paved, houses fixed, confront landlords, jobs, sound familiar, better health care, and then we got involved with voter registration, and we're part of the reason why the Hatch Act was passed, which said that if you're a part of the government, you can't, work in, because we were using these vehicles to take people to the polls, and so then it became against the law to do that, in part because of work that we were doing.
I was just wondering, do you think that some of our young people here are getting too caught up in the glam of mobilization versus the hard work of organizing? Because I know that whether you're talking about Ferguson, whether you're talking about Trayvon, or whether you're talking about even the Occupy movement, those were very much mobilization kind of things.
Yeah.
But then when it comes down to the hard work of the actual organization, then things don't happen as much.
Yeah, you know what? I think there's both. I think there are young people who are doing both. There are people who are engaged in what I would call real organizing work, and then there are people who are just doing the mobilizing part. I think one of the things, Mark, that I believe is very important as you get older is not to cast aspersions on younger people about what they're not doing. In part because most of us don't even know what they're doing or not doing. And that there's different forms of struggle. Right? And what I try to be more clear about and try to learn from young people is what is the form of struggle that they're using. And I may have to even rethink some of my ideas about organizing and all of that, just based on it's a different historical period. And the way that people go about trying to bring about change. Even though I think there are some fundamental principles, I'm really open to seeing different possibilities, you know, so. Yes.
Thank you for coming back. I'm delighted to see you again after almost 50 years. You probably don't remember me because I know I look a lot more different now.
I'm sure I do too.
Not as much as me. you look more like you did then than I did. And I was all in the mix of everything that I've heard you talking about. Here's a question I'd like to hear your thoughts on. And I'm not even quite sure how to ask it, but I'm going to do my best. When you came onto the campus and met us, because I was in the group, did you make an assessment of us? Did you have an opinion about who we were and an assessment in order to interact with us? Or did you move in the moment as seemed good? And the reason I ask that is to sort of pick your brain, if you will, about how to do it in this moment. Whether to make assessments and try to comprehend and understand what the currents are running inside of young people, or do you simply move in the way that seems good out of the interactions that are present? Because the whole lot of us from that day went in different directions. Yeah. And I think probably to the person have lived out for almost 50 years many of the same commitments that we held back then. I'm not sure whether that's a clear enough question.
No, it's clear. I would say it's the latter as opposed to the former. I mean, I don't ever remember really trying to make an assessment as much as it was trying to figure out how we could get things done. And then as we got to know each other, we learned more about each other's views and perceptions and what was driving them, right? So maybe I knew Chuck a lot better because he'd been in the intern program. Mm-hmm. You know, so I got to know Vaughn better. And then Bertie, mm-hmm. just because Bertie had been a really active individual and then was the one really, I'm going to be with Malcolm X. In fact, we just emailed each other yesterday. So So I guess I would say that it was much more of we're working together, and then in the process of working together, you really got to know who was, back then we say who was jive, who was really serious, and who was going to do stuff, who was going to talk stuff. You just got to know that in the process, and there would have been no way to do any kind of objective analysis of that walking in. And plus, I never believed that you could have this professional objectivity. I always felt you got to get engaged with people in a real and human way, and that's how you best develop relationships that allow you to try to move forward. I think what is interesting is that a number of us who are still alive are still doing things that we think are important, but as you know, some of us along the way stepped outside of any kind of involvement for social justice and got engaged in, I'm moving to improve my individual self. And I'm not going to be engaged in any kind of social justice stuff. But I think that's probably relatively few of us, mm-hmm. Actually, just based on the contacts that I've had over the years with people. And what I think happened, and I don't know that this is true, I think the type of social movement that we were involved in, it changed you forever. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Because of the nature of it. It changed you forever. And you just could never go back to whatever it was you thought you were going to be when you first set foot on this campus. And some people have paid a heavy price for that, mm-hmm. right? I was in Greensboro Tuesday night, and there's a brother named Nelson Malloy who joined the Black Panther Party. And it almost cost him his life. Now he's been in a wheelchair for, I don't know, 30 years or more. He paid a heavy price. And so, but you know what I'm encouraged by is I chair the board of a charter school. And for all of the frustrations, and there are many, I see young people who, have a lot of heart. They're living in some horrific conditions, right? And they have to have a certain inner strength to even get out of this. But what I see in them is the capacity for greatness. What I got to try to get them to understand is I don't want you to become Shelby Steele. Where so the book I'm talking about, content about character, where you begin to talk about things like race fatigue and, because I made it, I ain't got no responsibility to like these lowlifes who don't take advantage of everything that America's got to offer. I'm really trying to get them to see that to whom much is given, much is expected. And that if you do get to the point where you're able to do well, it's very important to me that you do good. And that there's a relationship between what you all are now getting and your ability or your responsibility, I think, to those who are not advantaged in the same way you are. It's like Amilcar Cabral wrote the book Return to the Source. And he was talking about what is the responsibility of what do you call it, the intelligentsia of an oppressed people. What is your responsibility, right? And I think our responsibility is to be engaged in our communities and try to bring about change. And that's sort of, that fire still burns within me every day.
Thank you for coming back.
Oh, that's right.
Let's take one last question.
I'm just wondering, how do you stay encouraged, I guess, thinking about like this article that just came out saying that America is not a democracy, it's an oligarchy, where, the interests of the people who have the most power and control are so different from the interests of average people. And it seems as if the interests, that it's not going to make a difference in the end anyway, if the interests do not converge with the interests of the people.
You know what? One of the things I've learned in the study of history is that history repeats itself. It just doesn't repeat itself like this. It repeats itself like this. So it repeats itself under a different set of historical conditions. And so the fact is that some of the arguments that we're currently having have been had before in America. This is not the first time, we've had the fierce kind of class divides that we have now, or the kind of, I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat, and we don't care about America, or our view of America is so radically different that it means we can't possibly do anything together. If you study American history, there were other periods where some of these same types of divisions and stuff have occurred. And if history repeats itself, what there's going to be is organized and massive resistance at some point to what it is that is occurring. And that to me is always the hope. And it is to the extent that it's possible to have democracy. That's where the hope is. So if you read like Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, that's a scary book. But the scariest one is That Used to Be Us. And what he does is he talks about the 5 pillars that have enabled America to be great. One of them is that we had an immigration policy that understood that not only do you want the best minds, you also want people who just want to come here and build a better life for their families. The second thing is that we took care of our infrastructure, roads, fiber optics, bridges. Third thing is that there was a relationship between the government and the private sector, such that the government did research, the private sector took advantage of that research. The fourth thing was that we provided public education. Public education, and to me there's a difference between public education and the system that delivers it. And then the fifth thing was that there was enough regulation so that you could have entrepreneurship, but you wouldn't have the kind of meltdown that took place, and that's probably still going on. The difference is that his argument is that the body politic put America ahead of individual parties and ideologies. The period that we're in right now, that is not what is occurring, which is why it's almost impossible to tackle the great human problems that we have to tackle. So the question is, what is it going to take to move us away from this period that we're in to another period? Because historically, we have moved from those dark periods, if I can use that, to another period. But because the world is so different, it's not clear to me what the pathway is going to be for that to occur. But for me personally, the only way I can continue to do this is the ed reform work or whatever work I'm doing, is I can't look at the macro dynamics of the problems that we have. Because if I did, I wouldn't leave my house. I literally have to look at the micro. I have to look at, here's a charter school that you're working on, man. And you can impact the lives of these 260-some kids. Here's a particular thing that you're working on. And I'm not operating under any illusions that that's changing the system. In fact, what I finally do in this book, in the reflection part of it, is I admit when I was their age, I thought that I could change the world. And I hope they keep thinking they can change the world. What I now see myself on is a rescue mission. I'm trying to rescue as many people as I can to try to have a better life for them individually, to hopefully break some of the chains that if we don't break it, they will continue to do the same things over and over again. And you hope that there's enough of us, or enough of them, where their collective chain breaking will begin to have a larger impact on the society. That's the only thing that gives me hope. But I try not to be Pollyannish or operate under illusions, about, what is happening, if that makes sense. All right.
Dr. Howard Fuller.
Yeah,